I never thought I'd throw my own father out of the house, but that night, something inside me snapped. It had been raining all afternoon, the kind of cold Ohio rain that soaks through your jacket and leaves you shivering no matter how many layers you're wearing. I came home from my shift at the diner exhausted, my feet aching, my uniform still smelling like grease and coffee. And there he was, sitting in the same spot on the old brown couch, the TV blaring some western from the 70s, an open beer can sweating on the table in front of him. "Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You promised. No more drinking in the house." He didn't even flinch. Didn't look at me. Just raised the can and took another sip, his eyes glued to the screen like I wasn't even there. That was it for me. All the frustration I'd been swallowing for months, the unpaid bills, the neighbors whispering about my dad being the town drunk, the way my friends would quietly stop inviting me places, it all boiled over. I slammed my bag on the table so hard the can tipped and beer spilled across the surface. "Did you hear me? I said no more drinking in this house." This time, he turned his head slowly, his face calm in a way that only made me angrier. He didn't yell, didn't argue, just stared at me with those tired, sad eyes. And for some reason, that hurt even more. "You need to leave," I said, my voice cracking. "I can't do this anymore, Dad. Pack your stuff. You can't stay here." For a second, he just stood there, like he didn't understand what I'd said. Then, without a word, he got up. I watched as he walked to his room, pulled out his old duffel bag, the same one he'd used for fishing trips when I was a kid, and started filling it with his clothes. No yelling. No begging. Just silence. I stood frozen in the doorway, my hands shaking, my heart racing. Part of me wanted to stop him, to take it back. But my pride wouldn't let me. When he came back through the living room, the bag slung over his shoulder, he paused for just a moment. His eyes met mine. There was no anger in them, no fight. Just sadness. Like he knew something I didn't. Then he walked out into the rain without looking back. The sound of the door closing echoed through the house, louder than any slam. I stood there in the quiet, my chest tight, staring at the empty couch where he'd been sitting. For a long time, I just stood there, trying to convince myself I'd done the right thing. That he needed a wake-up call. That I was protecting myself. But deep down, something in my gut twisted painfully, whispering that maybe, just maybe, I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. I didn't sleep that night. I kept waiting to hear his key in the door, to see him walk back in and mutter an apology. But the house stayed silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. By morning, there was no sign of him. No note. No call. Just that empty, hollow feeling that no amount of coffee could wash away. I told myself he'd be fine, that he had friends, that he'd figure it out. But a part of me, one I didn't want to admit to, was already scared. Scared that I'd pushed away the only family I had left. The house didn't feel like my house anymore. It was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that brings peace. It was heavy, like the walls were holding their breath, waiting for something that wasn't coming back. The first night after I told Dad to leave, I thought maybe I'd feel some relief, like I had taken control of my life. But all I felt was this strange emptiness that crept into every corner of the place. His old coffee mug was still sitting by the sink, stained from years of use. His boots were gone from by the door, leaving a clean patch on the mat where the dust hadn't settled yet. And the couch. God, I couldn't even look at that couch without hearing the echo of him shuffling in late at night, trying not to wake me, or humming those old country songs he thought I didn't know by heart. I kept telling myself I'd done the right thing. That this was what tough love looked like. That maybe he'd finally get the help he needed. But every time I walked through that front door, the silence hit me like a punch in the gut. No TV blaring. No clinking of a bottle cap. Just me, and the hum of the refrigerator, and that awful stillness that made it hard to breathe. A couple of days later, our neighbor, Mrs. Taylor, caught me by the mailbox. She's one of those sweet, nosy types who knows everyone's business. She tilted her head, her soft gray curls bouncing as she asked, "Where's your daddy, honey? Haven't seen him around." I forced a smile I didn't feel and muttered, "He's staying somewhere else for a while. Just needed some space." She gave me that look, half pity, half curiosity, but didn't push. As I walked away, my face burned. I hated lying, but how could I tell her the truth? That I'd thrown out the only family I had left? At night, it got worse. Lying in my bed, staring at the ceiling, I'd replay that moment in my head, him standing in the doorway with that bag over his shoulder, the look in his eyes. I wanted to believe he was angry, that it was easier for him to walk away than fight for me. But deep down, I knew better. There hadn't been anger in those eyes. Just hurt. And maybe a little bit of resignation. Like he'd expected it all along. I started avoiding the living room altogether. I'd come home from work, head straight to my room, and scroll through my phone until I fell asleep. Anything to drown out the quiet. My friends noticed I wasn't myself. One night, Jenna invited me out for drinks, but I made some excuse. The truth was, I didn't want to sit at a bar pretending to laugh while my mind kept wandering to where he might be sleeping. A week passed, then two. No calls. No texts. Nothing. At first, I was angry. How could he not check in? Didn't he realize how dangerous it was out there? But then the anger faded, and what was left scared me even more, the thought that maybe he didn't want to come back. I'd catch myself looking at the front door every time I heard a car drive by, hoping, praying, that it was him. That he'd walk in, smelling like rain and old flannel, grumble about the weather, and sit down like nothing ever happened. But the door stayed shut. Some nights, I'd sit on the edge of my bed with my phone in my hand, hovering over his number, my thumb shaking as I thought about calling. But every time, my pride stopped me. I was the one who'd told him to leave. I was the one who'd made it clear he wasn't welcome. What could I even say? I'm sorry. Come home? If you're listening to this right now, you probably know what that kind of silence feels like. The kind that eats away at you until you start questioning everything you said, everything you did. And if you want to hear what happened next, because trust me, you won't believe it, make sure you subscribe to the channel. There's so much more to this story, and you don't want to miss it. But at that moment, I didn't know any of that. I didn't know how much my life was about to change, or how deep my father's love for me really went. All I knew was that the house was quiet, my heart was heavy, and every day that passed without hearing from him made that quiet feel louder and louder. It had been almost 3 weeks since I'd seen or heard from my dad. 3 weeks of silence, of second-guessing myself, of walking through that empty house and feeling like a stranger in my own life. I'd started to convince myself that maybe he was fine, that maybe he'd found a place to stay, maybe even a job. It was the only way I could sleep at night, pretending that he was out there, rebuilding, starting fresh. That Tuesday morning, I was halfway through my shift at the diner when my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. The number flashing on the screen wasn't one I recognized, but something in me tightened when I saw it. I stepped outside, wiping my hands on my apron, and answered. Hello? The voice on the other end was calm, professional. Is this Emma Miller? Yes, I said, my stomach twisting. This is St. Joseph's Medical Center. Are you the daughter of Robert Miller? For a moment, the world stopped. The clatter of dishes from inside, the traffic on the street, even the chill in the autumn air, it all faded until there was only the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Yes, I whispered, barely able to breathe. There's no need to panic, the nurse said gently. Your father is stable, but we need you to come down here as soon as you can. Stable. That word should have comforted me, but it didn't. It only made my mind race with every possibility. Had he been in an accident? Had someone hurt him? Or was it what I feared most, that his drinking had finally caught up to him? I mumbled something to my manager inside the diner, grabbed my purse, and drove to the hospital as fast as I could. Every red light felt like an eternity, every slow car in front of me an obstacle I wanted to scream at. When I finally walked into the emergency wing, the smell of antiseptic and the sharp brightness of the fluorescent lights hit me like a wave. A nurse led me down a quiet hallway, her voice low and kind, but I barely heard her over the pounding in my head. And then, there he was. Lying in a hospital bed, pale and too still, wires and tubes connected to machines that beeped softly beside him. For a second, I couldn't move. He looked so small, so fragile. This man who had always seemed larger than life, who could fix anything with his calloused hands and a roll of duct tape, now looked like someone I barely recognized. I finally forced myself to step closer, my throat tight. Dad, I whispered, my voice trembling. His eyelids fluttered, and for a moment I thought maybe he didn't recognize me. But then those tired eyes opened, and he gave me the faintest, almost embarrassed smile. Hey, kid, he rasped, his voice rough but soft. My heart broke all over again. Why didn't you call me? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady but failing. He looked away, like he couldn't stand to meet my eyes. "Didn't want to bother you," he said quietly. "Didn't want to bother me." The words cut deeper than I expected. He was lying in a hospital bed, and he'd still been worried about me, about intruding on my life, about being a burden. The doctor came in a few minutes later and explained that he'd collapsed at a construction site where he'd been doing day labor. Dehydration, exhaustion, and a bad fall had left him with a concussion and a few broken ribs. He'd been living in a storage unit, the doctor said gently, and working odd jobs to make a little cash. I stood there, numb, barely hearing the words, just staring at him as guilt swelled in my chest like a storm. This was my fault. I had pushed him out. I had told him to leave. And instead of asking for help, he'd just disappeared, trying to make it on his own. I sat by his bed until visiting hours were over, holding his hand while he drifted in and out of sleep. His hands were rougher than I remembered, his knuckles scraped, his fingernails stained with dirt and grease. I wanted to tell him everything, how sorry I was, how scared I'd been, how much I missed him, but the words wouldn't come. When I finally left that night, walking through the dimly lit parking lot, I realized my hands were shaking. Not just from fear, but from the weight of everything I hadn't said. I didn't know it then, but that phone call was just the beginning. The beginning of finding out who my dad really was, what he'd been doing all that time, and just how much he'd sacrificed for me. When the hospital finally released him, I drove Dad back, expecting him to give me an address or at least a friend's place where I could drop him off. Instead, he gave me quiet directions that led us to the edge of town, past the strip malls and gas stations, to a row of rusted storage units. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I pulled into the gravel lot, my stomach twisting with every bump. "This is it," he said softly, his voice barely above the hum of the engine. I thought he was joking at first. But then I saw the way he wouldn't meet my eyes, the way he hesitated before unlocking one of the units. Inside, there was nothing but a thin mattress on the floor, a blanket neatly folded at the foot, a dented thermos, and that old duffel bag I'd watched him carry out of my house weeks earlier. I just stood there, frozen in the doorway, trying to understand what I was seeing. My father, the man who'd once built me a treehouse in our backyard, who'd worked overtime to make sure I had new shoes for school every year, had been living here. In a storage unit. "Dad," my voice cracked as I took a step inside. "Why didn't you tell me? You could've." He cut me off with a small shake of his head. "Didn't want you worrying about me. You had enough on your plate." I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to take back every angry word I'd said the night I threw him out. But instead, I just nodded, because what could I say? That night, after dropping him back off, I sat in my car in the dark, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. The guilt was suffocating. All this time, I'd been angry, blaming him for disappearing, telling myself he didn't care. And all this time, he'd been surviving in a cold storage unit, too proud to ask for help. The next morning, I went to the bank to deposit my paycheck. The teller, a young woman I'd seen a few times before, glanced up from her computer. "Oh," she said with a smile. "Are you Mr. Miller's daughter?" I hesitated, confused. "Yes." "Your father left something for you," she said, her tone softening. She handed me a sealed envelope, my name scrawled across the front in his familiar handwriting. I opened it right there in the lobby, my fingers trembling. Inside was a bank receipt, a payment confirmation showing that my entire student loan balance, every last cent of it, had been paid off. At first, I didn't understand. I stared at the numbers, blinking, convinced I was reading it wrong. But it was real. Tens of thousands of dollars. Gone. Paid in full. I stumbled outside into the parking lot, the paper shaking in my hands. My mind raced, trying to figure out how he'd done it. He didn't have savings. He didn't have a steady job. And then it hit me, the odd jobs, the exhaustion, the bruises on his hands, the way his back seemed stiffer every time I saw him. He'd been working himself to the bone, doing any job he could find, selling anything of value he owned, just to give me a clean slate. I sat in my car, the tears coming so fast I couldn't stop them. Every late night I'd spent blaming him, every bitter word I'd thrown his way, every moment I told myself he didn't love me, all of it felt like a weight crushing my chest. He hadn't just cared. He'd sacrificed everything for me. I drove straight to the storage unit, desperate to tell him I knew, to tell him I was sorry, to tell him thank you. But when I got there, the door was shut and locked. I banged on the metal, calling his name, but there was no answer. I sat there in the parking lot for hours, the envelope still clutched in my hand, staring at that rusted door, my mind spinning. I didn't know where he was, or when he'd be back. All I knew was that my father, the man I'd thrown out of my house, had quietly given me the greatest gift anyone ever could. And in that moment, I realized something I should have known all along: he had never stopped being my dad. Even when I'd stopped being his daughter. I sat in my car with the envelope in my lap, staring at the receipt over and over like maybe the numbers would change if I blinked enough. But they didn't. Tens of thousands of dollars. Every cent of my student debt, gone. Paid off by the man I had kicked out, the man I had blamed for every problem in my life. It was hard to breathe. My chest felt tight, like someone was sitting on it. Every angry word I'd thrown at him replayed in my head, sharper now, crueler than I remembered. Every moment I told myself he didn't care burned in my gut. And now, holding that proof in my hands, I realized the truth. While I had been resenting him, he had been breaking his back to give me the kind of future he never had. I thought about all the odd jobs I'd heard whispers about: construction sites, night shifts at warehouses, even cleaning parking lots after closing. I remembered the cuts on his hands, the way his shoulders had started to slump, how tired he looked that last time I saw him before the hospital. I had told myself it was just the drinking, that he had given up. But no. He hadn't given up at all. He had been fighting every single day, quietly, without asking for thanks or recognition, just so I could be free of a burden he never wanted me to carry. By the time I pulled out of the bank parking lot, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. I drove straight to the storage unit, hoping, praying, that he'd be there. But when I got there, the door was shut tight and locked. The little padlock dangled cold and still, like it hadn't been touched all day. I sat there for what felt like hours, my forehead resting against the steering wheel, tears streaming down my face. I wanted to tell him I knew. I wanted to thank him, to beg him to come home, to tell him that none of it mattered anymore, the drinking, the fights, the pride. None of it. But he wasn't there. The next day, I went back. And the day after that. Every time, the unit was locked, the gravel around it undisturbed. It was like he had vanished. At night, lying in my bed, I couldn't stop my mind from spinning. Where was he sleeping? Was he eating? Was he safe? And underneath all of that was a quieter, more painful thought: had I hurt him so badly that he didn't think he could come back? The guilt became something physical, something heavy that sat on my chest and followed me everywhere. At work, I'd catch myself staring at the clock, wondering where he was. At the grocery store, I'd find myself buying his favorite coffee, only to put it back on the shelf because what was the point? One night, I found myself sitting on the kitchen floor, that receipt in my hand, just sobbing. I thought about the way he used to sit on that same floor with me when I was little, eating peanut butter sandwiches because we couldn't afford much else, but somehow it never felt like we were poor. He'd make me laugh, make up stories, tell me everything was going to be okay. And now, all these years later, he'd been doing the same thing. Quietly, silently, making sure I was okay, even if it meant he wasn't. That was the weight of the truth, that I had been so busy being angry, so caught up in my own pain, that I hadn't seen his love for what it really was. A love that gave and gave, even when it got nothing in return. I couldn't let it end like this. I couldn't sit there and let the last words I'd said to my father be the ones that pushed him out the door. I made a promise to myself that night. I was going to find him. No matter how long it took, no matter how hard it was, I was going to look him in the eye and tell him the one thing I should have said a long time ago. Thank you. And I'm sorry. I didn't sleep the night I made the decision to find him. I just sat there at the kitchen table, staring at that receipt, turning it over in my hands until the ink smudged. By the time the sun came up, I had a plan, or at least, the start of one. I drove to every place I thought he might be. The small construction sites around town where he sometimes picked up day work. The diner where he'd sit for hours with just a cup of coffee and a crossword puzzle. Even the rundown bar on 3rd Street where I swore I'd never step foot. No one had seen him. Every time someone shook their head, a little bit more panic crept in. I left my number with everyone I talked to, telling them to call me if they saw him. I could see the pity in their eyes, but I didn't care. Pride didn't matter anymore. By the 3rd day, I was desperate. I drove through neighborhoods I hadn't been in since I was a kid, the places where he used to take me fishing or where we'd go for ice cream in the summer. Nothing. Then, on the 4th day, just when I was starting to feel like maybe I'd never find him, I saw him. He was sitting on a weathered wooden bench by the river, the same one we used to sit on when I was little, our fishing lines tangled in the water as he told me stories that were half true and half made up. His shoulders were hunched, his jacket too thin for the cold breeze coming off the water. For a moment, I just sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, my heart racing. I didn't know what to say, how to start. What could possibly make up for everything I'd said, everything I'd done? Finally, I forced myself to get out and walk toward him. My footsteps crunched on the gravel, and he turned his head slightly, just enough to see me. His expression didn't change. He didn't smile, didn't frown. He just looked tired. I sat down beside him, my hands shaking. For a long time, neither of us said anything. The sound of the river filled the silence between us. "I know," I finally whispered, my voice breaking. "About the loans. About what you did for me." He didn't look at me. His eyes stayed on the water. "You deserved better than me," he said quietly. "At least I could give you that start." The tears came before I could stop them. "No," I said, my voice trembling. "I didn't deserve you working yourself into the ground for me. I didn't deserve you living like that. And I sure as hell didn't deserve your love after the way I treated you." His jaw tightened, but he still wouldn't look at me. "I'm sorry," I said, the words tumbling out now, fast and desperate. "I'm so sorry for everything I said, for everything I did. You were right there for me, and I didn't see it. I didn't see you." Finally, he turned his head, his eyes meeting mine. They were tired eyes, lined with pain and years of sacrifice, but there was something else there too, something soft, something forgiving. "You're my kid," he said, his voice low but steady. "That's all that matters. You'll always be my kid." I broke then. All the walls I'd built, all the anger and pride I'd been clinging to, they all crumbled in that moment. I leaned into him, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I let him hold me. We sat there for a long time, the river rushing by, the cold seeping through our jackets, neither of us caring. I didn't have the right words to fix everything, and maybe there weren't any. But in that moment, it didn't matter. Because for the first time since the night I threw him out, I felt like I had my dad back. I don't remember how long I stood there, frozen on that old porch, before my dad opened the door. His hair was grayer, his face thinner, but his eyes, those same warm, steady eyes, locked on mine like no time had passed at all. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The world around us just disappeared. It was the same house I grew up in, but it felt smaller now, quieter, almost fragile. "I didn't think you'd come," he said finally, his voice rough, like it hadn't been used in days. I swallowed hard, my throat burning. I didn't think I would either. We stood there, this chasm of years in silence between us, until he stepped back and motioned for me to come in. The air smelled like coffee and old wood, just like it used to, and for a second, I was a kid again, running through these halls, yelling for him to come watch me ride my bike. But then I remembered the anger, the night I told him to get out, and it all came rushing back. The kitchen table was cluttered with papers and pill bottles. My heart tightened when I saw the medications, things I didn't recognize, things that screamed of hospital visits I hadn't been there for. He caught me looking and gave a small, sheepish smile. "Doctor says I'm not as tough as I used to be," he said. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I sat down at the table, and for a long time, we just sat there. Two people who used to know each other better than anyone, now strangers trying to find the right words. Finally, he broke the silence. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For not telling you. For letting you think I was just a disappointment. I thought I was protecting you. I thought if I carried it alone, you could have the kind of life I never did." My chest tightened. "And I'm sorry," I whispered. "For saying what I said. For kicking you out. I didn't know." He shook his head. "You had every right to be angry. I should have trusted you. I just didn't want you to hate me." I felt tears sting my eyes. "I never hated you," I said, my voice breaking. I didn't understand." And in that moment, all the weight I'd been carrying, the anger, the guilt, the regret, just broke. We sat there for hours, talking about everything and nothing, filling in the years we'd lost. He told me about the nights he spent driving trucks, the friends he'd lost, the quiet moments where he'd sit in the dark and wonder if I'd ever forgive him. I told him about my life, my job, the person I was becoming, the person I wanted to be. Before I left that night, he grabbed my hand, his grip surprisingly firm. "We can't get back the time we lost," he said, his eyes glistening. "But maybe we can make the time we have left count." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Driving home, the world looked different. Brighter, somehow. I realized that second chances don't erase the past, they don't make the pain go away or fix every broken thing. But they give you a place to start. It's been a few months since that night. We talk every week now. Sometimes we just chat about nothing, sports, the weather, the dog that keeps getting into his trash. Other times, we sit in silence, just being there. And that's enough. Looking back, I know I can't undo the day I snapped, the words I threw like knives, or the years we spent apart. But what I can do is choose differently now. I can show up. I can listen. I can love him without conditions, the way he always loved me, even when I didn't see it. Because in the end, that's what family is. Messy. Imperfect. Full of mistakes and regrets. But also full of love, and the possibility of something better, if you're willing to take that second chance.